They can barely wait for the attack to begin. They're victims of one of Saddam Hussein's most appalling crimes. At the end of the Gulf War, this area supported more than 250,000 people living as they had for thousands of years, fishermen and rice farmers. And then Saddam Hussein decided they posed a threat and ordered his engineers to build what he named the Mother of All Battles Canal. The result? An assault on the environment and almost everyone who depended on the marshes for their existence. This is the story of the people whose lives have been devastated and the woman who swears to restore the environment and to return the people to the land of their ancestors.
I've been resentful of Saddam Hussein's keeping us out of Iraq for the last 5 years. We will go straight back in once his back is turned, and he's fleeing, as I'm sure he will.
Tonight, the Marsh Arabs, a story of destruction and determination. If war begins, at least one group of Iraqis is expected to support the American effort, the Marsh Arabs of southern Iraq. They heeded the call from the first President Bush to rise up against Saddam after the Gulf War. But Saddam's regime brutally crushed the uprising, killing and displacing tens of thousands. It also exacted a terrible revenge, draining the marshes and turning a thriving civilization into a barren desert. Human rights groups call it genocide, and it could be among the charges if Saddam Hussein is ever prosecuted for war crimes. Nightline correspondent Dave Marsh recently got a rare glimpse of the region that has suffered perhaps more than any other during Saddam's 25 years in power.
Autopsy on a dying landscape. It's hard to believe looking at this, but many believe the ancient wetlands that overlap the southern part of the border between Iran and Iraq was the location of the biblical Garden of Eden. Just 20 years ago, 450,000 people lived here. Marsh Arabs, most of them were called the Madan. They traced their roots back 5,000 years to the Sumerians. Today, the estimate is 10,000 residents remain. The rest have been driven off. As recently as the mid-1970s, when this film was made, the Madan lifestyle, poling past reed banks and islands in long carved boats called tiradas, fishing or farming rice or harvesting dates for food and trade, was flourishing. Villages with humble homes and bigger arched bamboo meeting halls called mudifs dotted the marshes that extended over an area roughly half the size of Ohio.
When you push out on the water, it's really a wonderful feeling. The marsh has a special smell. It's fragrant with dates.
Today, those memories live like extra pieces of luggage among the Iraqi Marsh Arab refugees like these living in the town of Huwaiza just across the border in Iran. If I went to the marshes today, what would I see?
Nothing at all. All you would see is sand and smoke. There are no fish or birds anymore. Everything has been burnt.
From a helicopter provided by the Iranian military, we could see the stages of death by desiccation and chemistry. Lakes once long and deep have shrunk to smaller, shallower ponds. This area was once all green. Now plants tan and dying and earth gray and dead smudge over most of the view. The flash of sunlight on water disappears as more and more dull, dun, dry ground appears. At ground level, a deceptive approximation of the way things used to be. The scene behind me looks very much the way the Al Huwaiza Marsh has looked for time immemorial. Except for one thing. If we had been here just 2 years ago, instead of standing with my foot at the water's edge, my head would be 10 feet underwater. A series of pictures taken from satellites orbiting over the marshlands reveals the death of this landscape is no accident. It was murder. Dark colors show large areas of wetland before Saddam Hussein began building his huge project to drain and control the Euphrates River. Then, as the mother of all battles canal siphons water away from the Euphrates, the Tigris, and the marshes, the darkness on the map, the wetlands on the Iraqi side of the border, disappear. Two things drove Saddam's Drain the Marshes project. Oil is buried beneath the wetlands, and drying them out improves access for development. And then there are the military issues. During the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, the marshes were an infiltration route and guerrilla battleground. After the Gulf War, President George H.W. Bush touched off an anti-Saddam uprising in southern Iraq.
And there's another way for the bloodshed to stop, and that is for the Iraqi military and the Iraqi people to take matters into their own hands and force Saddam Hussein, the dictator, to step aside.
After the U.S. abandoned the rebels after terrible massacres of Shiite dissidents at the Karbala Mosque and elsewhere, many of the rebels hid in the marshlands. To Saddam, the Marsh Arabs who were living in the swamps were also Shiites and therefore also suspect rebels, and so they were hit with bombs and chemical weapons and rounded up by troops and killed or simply force-marched out of the wetlands. Since 1991, an estimated 100,000 Iraqi Marsh Arabs have become refugees in Iran. About half of them live, often accompanied by their animals, sheep and goats and herds of water buffalo, in squatter camps outside Iranian cities and towns away from the official refugee camps. These squatters caught a break. The camp they came to has been adopted by the Amar Foundation, run by the formidable Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne, who prefers to be known as Emma.
As I see it, the primary need for refugees is to be treated with equality, human dignity, and absolute respect.
Amar's first contribution to this camp was clean water.
Clean water supply lies at the heart of human health. If you've got clean water, you cut the usage of hospital beds by as much as 80%. You cut children's diarrheal disease, one of the key killers, by 50%.
For Emma Nicholson's refugees, clean water is just the beginning. Ahead, there are health training and schooling and a concerted campaign of justice for prosecuting Saddam Hussein for genocide.
And were the women raped or ill-treated?
On her periodic visits to the border region, Emma Nicholson slips into another role, prosecuting attorney.
The Iraqi soldiers killed my husband. They said he opposed them. I was left with my children completely helpless.
What you have to prove first and foremost is that there are long-planned intent to wipe out a particular subset of humanity. So you have to have a group that qualifies. You have to have someone of evil intent whose whole purpose is what one can only describe as the scorched earth policy. Wipeout, total wipeout. Over the last 12 years, bit by bit by bit, Saddam Hussein has wiped out the Marsh people.
In the camps where many Iraqis have been stranded in exile for a dozen years, there is a palpable sense of expectation. Almost all of the Iraqi refugees in this squatter camp and in the official refugee camps can't wait for a war to oust Saddam Hussein and give them the opportunity to go home. But meanwhile, the Iranian government has to make its own preparations. And although we were not allowed to film them, we know that at least 10 new refugee camps are being built in the border area, with a projected capacity of 200,000 people. It may be years before these wasted wetlands can be restored, but Emma Nicholson insists it can be done, and she says many Marsh Arab people will be ready and able to continue their traditional ways there. Bringing the stories of a people and their landscape full circle, while bringing Saddam Hussein to justice would be for Emma Nicholson a perfect conclusion. I'm Dave Marsh for Nightline in Huwaiza, Iran.